North Atlantic, February 1942. The convoy moved like a herd crossing Predator territory. 43 merchant ships arranged in 9 columns, each vessel maintaining exactly 600 yards from its neighbors. From the bridge of the SS Rosecastle, Captain Edmund Pierce could see the entire formation spread across the gray water, a geometry of survival painted on an indifferent ocean. He checked his watch. 0340 hours. 3 hours until dawn, when the Luftwaffe might come. But dawn wasn't the problem. The problem was what hunted in the dark. The North Atlantic in winter is a sensory assault. The wind doesn't blow. It cuts, a blade of ice drawn across exposed skin. The waves don't roll. They attack. 10-meter swells that lift a 10,000-ton freighter like driftwood, then drop it into a trough where the world becomes nothing but walls of black water. The cold penetrates steel, wool, flesh. Men on watch counted minutes, not hours, before hypothermia became a concern. Pierce had made this crossing 17 times since the war began. He'd lost count of how many ships he'd seen go down. You learned not to watch too carefully, not to think about the men in the water. 30 seconds in water this cold and your muscles stopped working. 2 minutes, and you stopped thinking. 5 minutes, and it didn't matter anymore. The merchantman 3 columns over, Empire Steel, carried aviation fuel. 12,000 tons of it, bound for England's airfields. If a torpedo found her, the explosion would be visible for 30 miles. There wouldn't be survivors. There never were with the tankers. Captain, first mate's voice was tight. Asdick reports possible contact, 2 points off the starboard bow. Pierce felt his stomach clench, not fear. He'd burned through fear somewhere around crossing number 9. This was something colder, something closer to mathematics. Every convoy lost an average of 6 ships. 43 ships meant 6 crews, 250 men would likely not see port. The question was never if, only which. Sound action stations. Quietly. The alarm went through the ship as a vibration rather than a sound, a shudder that brought men from bunks and card games to their posts. Pierce watched the escort destroyers on the convoy's perimeter begin to wheel, their wakes white against the black water. One peeled off toward the suspected contact, depth charges ready. Then 3 columns to port Empire Steel erupted. The torpedo struck amidships, exactly where 12,000 tons of aviation fuel waited in the steel tanks. The explosion was less a sound than a physical presence, a hammer of pressure that slammed across the water. Pierce felt it in his chest, in his teeth. The tanker became a pillar of flame, orange and white and obscenely bright against the darkness, turning the ocean into daylight for a radius of a mile. Pierce forced himself to watch. 17 crossings had taught him this much. You bore witness. The men burning on. That deck deserved at least that much. The Empire Steel lasted 9 minutes before she broke in half. Both sections went down burning, the flames following them beneath the surface until the Atlantic finally swallowed the light. No lifeboats launched. No survivors called from the water. 250 men became a problem of arithmetic, a number subtracted from a ledger. The convoy didn't stop, couldn't stop. The remaining 42 ships maintained course and speed, their wakes spreading out behind them like cracks in glass. Somewhere beneath the surface, the U-boat was already sliding away, diving deep to evade the depth charges, reloading its torpedo tubes. By the time the sun rose 3 hours later, 2 more ships were gone. Washington, D.C., March 1942. The conference room in the Navy Department building smelled of coffee and cigarette smoke and something less definable. The particular tension of men trying to solve a problem that was actively killing people while they talked. Admiral Emory Land, chairman of the U.S. Maritime Commission, stood at the head of the table, his hand resting on a stack of reports that kept growing thicker each week. Round the table sat representatives from the Navy, the War Department, the British Admiralty, and various shipbuilding companies. On the wall behind Land, a map of the Atlantic bristled with pins. Red for ships sunk, blue for convoys en route. There was significantly more red than blue. Gentlemen, Land's voice carried the particular weariness of a man who had delivered versions of this briefing too many times. The numbers. He lifted the first report. January 1942, German U-boats and surface raiders sank 62 Allied merchant ships. Total tonnage, 327,357 tons. February, 85 ships, 476,451 tons. March is not yet complete, but current projections put us at 95 ships minimum. He set the report down. In the first quarter of 1942, we'll lose approximately 250 ships. That's 1.4 million tons of carrying capacity removed from Allied supply lines. A British Admiralty officer, Commander Wallace, thin and pale in a way that suggested too many nights working and not enough days sleeping, spoke up. "Admiral, if I may, the problem is accelerating. U-boat production is increasing. Donuts has approximately 250 operational boats now. By year's end, we project 400. Current tactical doctrine calls for wolf pack tactics, coordinated group attacks on convoys. We're seeing packs of 8 to 12 boats." Land nodded. "Which brings us to the other half of the equation. How many ships did we build to replace these losses?" The man from the War Production Board cleared his throat. In 1941, all American shipyards combined produced approximately 1.1 million tons of merchant shipping. Current expanded production goals for 1942 are ambitious. We're projecting 5 million tons if all programs meet targets. "And if they don't meet targets?" Land asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Then we're losing ships faster than we can replace them. Britain's food reserves are currently at 4 months, fuel reserves at 6. If the current loss rate continues—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Land walked to the map, his finger tracing the convoy routes, thin blue lines stretching across an ocean increasingly dominated by red pins. Churchill's latest communication was frank. I'll quote, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. We could see our way through most of our other difficulties, but in facing this peril, I was not sure we would survive." The room absorbed this in silence. Land turned back to the table. "Gentlemen, I'm going to share with you a calculation that officially does not exist. Our analysts have run the numbers on what they're calling the starvation timeline." He picked up another report, though Pierce suspected he'd long since memorized its contents. "If current sink rates continue, and if our production capacity remains at current levels, Great Britain cannot sustain its war effort past early 1943. The Germans don't need to invade. They just need to wait." "Jesus," someone whispered. "The problem," Land continued, "is fundamentally one of mathematics. We're in a race. Can we build ships faster than the Germans can sink them? Right now, the answer is no. We're not even close." He pulled out a chair and sat, suddenly looking his full 62 years. "A traditional shipyard, using traditional methods, takes 6 to 8 months to build a cargo vessel. We have approximately 40 shipyards in this country capable of building ocean-going merchant ships. If they all operated at maximum capacity, working around the clock, we could build perhaps 200 ships per year. We need to build 2,000. The number hung in the air like smoke. "That's impossible," the War Production Board representative said, not argumentatively, simply stating a fact. "Yes," Land agreed, "by every conventional measure, it is impossible, which is why we're going to have to do something unconventional." He opened a folder and slid a photograph across the table. It showed a massive concrete structure spanning a river gorge. The Hoover Dam, built ahead of schedule, under budget, in the middle of the Great Depression in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. The primary contractor was a consortium called the Six Companies. He slid another photograph. The Grand Coulee Dam. Same contractor, same result. Finished early, worked perfectly. A third photograph. The Oakland Bay Bridge, again ahead of schedule. "I'm familiar with these projects," the Navy representative said. "Very impressive civil engineering, but we're talking about ships, Admiral. Naval architecture is a specialized—" "The lead contractor on all 3 projects," Land interrupted, "was a man named Henry J. Kaiser. He's never built a ship, never worked in a shipyard, never, as far as I can determine, spent more than a few days at sea in his life." He paused. "He also has a reputation for taking impossible projects and making them routine." Commander Wallace leaned forward. "You're suggesting we hand our emergency shipbuilding program to a man with no naval experience?" I'm suggesting, Land said carefully, that perhaps naval experience is not what we need. Every shipyard in this country is staffed with men who know exactly how to build ships. They can tell you in great detail why it's impossible to build them faster. What we need is someone who doesn't know it's impossible. He pulled out one more document, a proposal marked with the logo of a company called Kaiser Shipyards. Kaiser submitted a bid to build 30 cargo ships in 18 months. He claims he can do it with a workforce of mostly unskilled labor, women, elderly, people with no shipbuilding experience. He wants to build these ships the way Ford builds cars. Assembly line, standardized parts, welding instead of riveting. Land looked around the table. Every expert I've shown this to says it won't work. Then why are we discussing it? The Navy representative asked. Because, Land said quietly, every expert also said we'd never build Hoover Dam. They said the same thing about the Grand Coulee and the Oakland Bay Bridge. Kaiser has a habit of proving experts wrong. He stood walking back to the map, his hand hovering over the expanse of red pins. Gentlemen, we are losing the war in the Atlantic. Not might lose, are losing, right now, today. While we sit in this room, there are 43 convoys at sea. Statistical models say 6 ships from each convoy won't make port. That's 258 ships, 15,000 men. By the time we finish this meeting, at least one of those ships will be at the bottom of the ocean. He turned to face them. I don't care if Kaiser's methods are unconventional. I don't care if they offend traditional shipwrights. I don't care if his ships are ugly or inelegant or built by grandmothers and ballet dancers. I care about one thing. Can he build ships faster than the Germans can sink them? And if he can't, Commander Wallace asked. Land looked at the map, at the red pins spreading like a disease across the blue ocean. Then we lose. It's that simple. We lose the Battle of the Atlantic. Britain starves. And by this time next year, Hitler controls Europe permanently. He turned back to the table. But if Kaiser can do what he claims, if he can build ships in weeks instead of months, if he can train workers in days instead of years, if he can turn shipbuilding from a craft into an assembly line, then we have a chance. He gathered his reports, tapping them into alignment. The British have already given us the design. A simple, ugly, brutally functional cargo ship they call the Ocean class. The Maritime Commission has designated it the EC2SC1. Emergency cargo, 2-class steam engine, design C1. He smiled without humor. President Roosevelt took one look at the drawings and called it a dreadful-looking object. Said it was an ugly duckling, but he also said it might be exactly what we need. What's Kaiser asking for? The War Production Board representative asked. Everything, Land said. Steel priority, labor exemptions, government financing for new shipyards, permission to ignore most traditional shipbuilding regulations. He wants to build an entire shipyard from scratch in Richmond, California, on a site that's currently a mudflat. He claims he can have the first ship in the water in less than a year from breaking ground. That's insane, someone said. Yes, Land agreed. So is losing 250 ships a month. He closed his folder. The commission voted this morning. We're giving Kaiser the contract, 60 ships to be delivered by the end of 1942. If he succeeds, we'll order more. If he fails, Land shrugged. Well, we were going to lose anyway. As the meeting broke up, Commander Wallace approached Land. Admiral, a question. What makes you think Kaiser can actually do this? Land was quiet for a moment, looking at the map, at the red pins, at the thin blue lines of convoys stretching across an ocean that was becoming, day by day, a graveyard. Because, he said finally, Henry Kaiser doesn't know how to build ships. He only knows how to solve problems. And right now, that's exactly what we need. Richmond, California, March 1942. The site where 4 massive shipyards would soon rise was, at that moment, nothing but mud and marsh grass and the smell of low tide. Henry Kaiser stood at what would eventually be the head of shipway number 1, his shoes sinking slightly into the soft ground, and studied the emptiness. At 60 years old, Kaiser was a compact, energetic man whose round glasses and broad smile gave him an almost grandfatherly appearance, until you saw his eyes. Those eyes belonged to someone who looked at the world and saw not what was, but what could be made to be. "They think I'm crazy," he said to his son Edgar, who stood beside him, holding a rolled set of architectural plans. "Every shipbuilder on the East Coast is laughing. Do you know what they're calling this project?" "Kaiser's Folly," Edgar replied. "I've also heard Kaiser's Graveyard, and my personal favorite, the Money Pit." Henry smiled. "Good. Let them laugh. Laughing men don't pay attention." He gestured at the mud flat. "What do you see?" Edgar looked at the emptiness, the marsh, the bay beyond. "A challenging construction site, unstable soil, tidal variations of 8 feet, no existing infrastructure, no roads, no power, no housing for workers." He paused. "Honestly, Father, I see problems." "Exactly," Henry said. "Problems, not impossibilities. Problems have solutions." He pulled out his own copy of the plans, unrolling them against the wind. "The shipyard itself is the easy part. Shipways, workshops, cranes. I've built more complex structures than that. The real question is the ship." He pointed to a section of the plan showing the cross-section of the Liberty ship design. "Look at this. It's brilliant in its simplicity. No curves, no compound angles, no custom parts. It's a box, a steel box that floats. 5 cargo holds, steam engine, crew quarters. That's it. The British designed it to be built by people who've never built ships before." "But can it actually be built the way you're proposing?" Edgar asked. "Assembly line construction, welding instead of riveting, prefabricated sections?" Henry's smile widened. "Can it?" "Edgar, it's the only way it can be built. Traditional methods won't work. We don't have time for traditional methods. We don't have the skilled labor for traditional methods. What we have is a problem. Build ships faster than anyone has ever built ships before. The solution isn't to do the old thing faster, it's to do a completely new thing." He walked toward the bay, Edgar following. The wind off the water was cold, carrying the salt smell of the Pacific. "I visited a Ford plant last year, watched them build cars. Do you know what the secret is? It's not speed. It's not even efficiency. It's transformation. They transformed car building from a craft to a process. Instead of one master craftsman building one car, you have 100 workers, each doing one small thing over and over perfectly. The car doesn't go to the workers. The workers come to the car. And you want to do that with ships, not just ships. 10,000-ton cargo vessels built by housewives and grandfathers and kids fresh out of high school." Henry's voice took on an intensity that Edgar recognized. His father, seeing not the present, but the future, with absolute clarity. "We're going to prefabricate these ships in sections. Bow section, stern section, deck sections, bulkheads, all built in workshops on land where conditions are controlled, where we can use jigs and fixtures, where a worker can do the same weld over and over till they can do it in their sleep. Then we bring the sections to the shipway and assemble them like building blocks. The naval architects say welding is too risky," Edgar pointed out. "They say welded hulls are weaker than riveted ones. The naval architects are wrong," Henry said flatly. "Welding is faster, it's cheaper, and most importantly, it's learnable. It takes 6 months to train a good riveter. I can train a competent welder in 2 weeks. We don't have 6 months. We have right now." He turned to face his son. "Edgar, do you understand what's at stake here? This isn't about building ships. This is about whether democracy survives. Right now, German U-boats are sinking Allied ships faster than the world can replace them. Britain is being strangled. We can't break that stranglehold. Hitler wins. It's that simple." "No pressure, then," Edgar said dryly. Henry laughed, a short bark of amusement. "Pressure? I built the Hoover Dam in 5 years. In 120-degree heat, in a canyon where dozens of men died. I can build ships. On a mudflat in California." He rolled up his plans. "The hard part isn't the engineering. The hard part is going to be convincing people it's possible. People like the workers you're going to hire?" "No," Henry said. "Workers will believe anything if you show them it works. I'm talking about the experts, the naval architects, the traditional shipbuilders, and the men who've been building ships for 30 years and who know, absolutely know, that what I'm proposing is impossible." He started walking back toward the car. "They're going to fight me every step of the way. They're going to say I'm cutting corners, taking risks, endangering sailors. And you know what? Some of them might be right. Edgar stopped. That's not reassuring, Father. Henry stopped too, turning to face the bay, the water, the horizon beyond. War isn't reassuring, Edgar. War is choosing between bad options and hoping you chose the less bad one. Right now, thousands of men are dying in the Atlantic because we don't have enough ships. If I build ships that are slightly more risky, but I build them fast enough to change the equation, fewer men die. That's the calculation. That's the only calculation. He was quiet for a moment, then added more softly, but I'm going to try very hard to make sure these ships are not more risky. I'm going to try very hard to get this right. They walked back to the car in silence. As Edgar opened the door, he asked, "When do we start?" Henry looked back at the mud flat, at the empty space that would, in less than a year, become the largest shipyard in the world. "We already did," he said. "The moment I signed that contract, the clock started ticking. Every day we don't have a ship in the water is a day the U-boats win." He got in the car, and as they drove away, he added, almost to himself, "They want 60 ships by the end of the year. I'm going to give them 100, and I'm going to prove that an amateur with the right ideas can beat a professional with the wrong ones." Behind them, the mudflat sat silent under the California sun. In 8 months, the first ship would slide down the ways into the bay. In 14 months, the Richmond shipyards would be producing a completed Liberty ship every single day. But first, Henry Kaiser had to build a factory and find 90,000 people willing to bet their lives that a man who'd never built a ship knew what he was doing. The numbers problem demanded a numbers solution, and Henry Kaiser was very good with numbers. Richmond, California, May 1942. The transformation of the mudflat happened with a speed that bordered on violence. Where marsh grass had grown for centuries, bulldozers now carved the earth into submission. Where birds had nested, cranes rose like steel skeletons against the sky. The bay itself was forced back, its waters constrained by new seawalls, its muddy bottom dredged and reshaped to accept the keels of ships that didn't yet exist. Henry Kaiser stood in what would soon be Shipyard. Number 2, watching a pile driver hammer steel pilings into the soft ground with rhythmic percussion that could be felt through boot soles. Around him, the noise was constant, a symphony of construction that never stopped, not for darkness, not for weather, not for anything except the occasional shift change when one crew replaced another. 17 weeks from breaking ground to first keel, his construction supervisor shouted over the din, "It's never been done." "It's being done now," Kaiser shouted back. He pointed toward the fabrication buildings rising to the east. "What's the status on the welding shops?" "First one's operational. Training started yesterday. Second and third will be ready by end of week." Kaiser nodded, already moving toward the administrative building, a temporary structure that would house the engineering staff. Inside, blessed silence, broken only by the scratch of pencils on paper and the occasional murmur of conversation. Chad Calhoun, Kaiser's chief naval architect, looked up from a drafting table covered in ship plans. At 35, Calhoun was young for his position, but he'd worked on merchant ship design for a decade and had come west specifically because Kaiser's project was, as he put it, either genius or suicide, possibly both. "We need to talk about the hull plates," Calhoun said without preamble. "The welding specs you want to use, they're outside normal parameters." Kaiser pulled up a chair. "Explain." Calhoun unrolled a section drawing of the hull. Traditional shipbuilding uses rivets. Each rivet is individually installed, which is slow and labor-intensive, but it also means the hull is essentially a series of separate plates held together by mechanical fasteners. If one plate cracks, the crack stops at the rivet line. He traced his finger along a seam. Welding creates a continuous joint. The plates become essentially one piece of metal. It's faster, it's stronger in many ways, but it also means a crack can propagate across multiple plates without stopping. "Is that a problem?" Kaiser asked. "Honest answer? I don't know. There's not enough data. Most ships are still riveted. The few all-welded ships in service are too new to have long-term performance records." Calhoun met Kaiser's gaze. "What I do know is that every traditional shipbuilder in the country thinks welded hulls are risky." Kaiser was quiet for a moment, then asked, "How long does it take to train a riveter?" 6 months for basic competency. year or more for real proficiency. And a welder? Calhoun hesitated. In theory, 2 weeks for basic arc welding, a month to be good at it. Then we weld, Kaiser said flatly. Chad, I respect the traditional shipbuilders, but they're trying to solve a 1942 problem with 1920 methods. We don't have time for 6-month training programs. We don't have skilled labor to draw from. Most able-bodied men are being drafted. What we have is urgency, necessity, and a workforce that will largely be women, elderly, and people who've never seen the inside of a shipyard. He stood walking to the window that overlooked the construction site. The British designed these ships specifically to be built quickly by inexperienced labor. The Americans modified that design to use even more welding, even more standardization. Every Liberty ship will have exactly 250,000 parts. Every part will be identical to the same part in every other ship. A bulkhead built in Pittsburgh will fit perfectly with a deck section built in Oakland. That's the theory, and Calhoun said carefully. Then we make it the practice. Kaiser turned back. I want you to work with the welding instructors, develop a training program that teaches one thing, how to make a perfect weld on hull plate. Not 20 kinds of welds, not general welding knowledge, one specific, repeatable, perfect operation. If someone can do that operation 1,000 times without error, I don't care if they've never seen a ship before. Calhoun made notes. The Navy inspectors are going to scrutinize every weld. Good, Kaiser said. Let them. Our welds will pass inspection because we're going to do them right, over and over, until doing them right is automatic. He headed for the door, then paused. Chad, how many Liberty ships were ordered total? Initial order is 200, but if the program works, potentially thousands. Then we're not building ships. We're building a system for building ships. Get it right now, and we change everything. Richmond, California, June 1942. The Richmond Field Hospital opened on a Tuesday, and by Friday, it was treating 150 workers a day. Sidney Garfield, the physician Kaiser had brought in to run the medical program, stood in the modest facility and watched the steady stream of people coming through, minor burns, cuts requiring stitches, the occasional broken bone. Occupational hazards, Garfield said to Kaiser during his tour of the facility. Shipbuilding is dangerous work, but here's what's interesting. We're catching things early, high blood pressure, diabetes, infections that in another workplace might go untreated until they became serious. Kaiser examined the setup. Examination rooms, a small surgical suite, and a dispensary. What's the cost structure? Workers pay 50 cents per week, automatically deducted from payroll. For that, they get complete medical care, exams, treatment, even surgery if needed. Their families pay an additional $1 per week for coverage. And it's sustainable? Garfield smiled. Henry, it's more than sustainable. It's transformative. We're keeping workers healthy, which means fewer lost work days. We're catching problems early, which means lower costs long-term, and workers know that if they get hurt, they're covered. No medical bills, no financial catastrophe. He paused. What you've created here is the first large-scale prepaid health plan in America. Kaiser looked uncomfortable with the praise. I created a system to keep workers on the job. The health benefits are incidental. Are they? Garfield asked. Or did you just reinvent health care the same way you're reinventing shipbuilding? Before Kaiser could answer, his assistant appeared. Mr. Kaiser, the first training class is about to start. You wanted to observe. The welding training facility occupied a warehouse that had been empty 3 weeks earlier. Now it contained 24 welding stations, each with its own power supply, protective equipment, and a series of thick steel plates waiting to be joined. The trainees filing in were not what traditional shipyards would have recruited. Kaiser watched them arrive. Women in coveralls, men in their 50s and 60s, a teenager who couldn't have been more than 17, 2 men on crutches who'd clearly suffered injuries that had kept them out of military service. The instructor was a compact man named Bill Strauss, who'd spent 20 years as a welding engineer before Kaiser had convinced him to come west with the promise of trying something that's never been tried before. Strauss stood before the class, his voice carrying easily in the cavernous space. Most of you have never welded before. Some of you have never worked in any kind of industrial setting. That's fine. That's actually good, because you don't have any bad habits I need to break. He held up a welding rod. "This is your tool. With this, you're going to join pieces of steel together so perfectly that the joint will be stronger than the steel itself. When you're done, when your training is complete, you will have one job. Make perfect welds on Liberty ship hull plates. Not good welds, not acceptable welds. Perfect welds, every time, 1,000 times a day if that's what's needed." A woman in the front row, her name tag read Dorothy, raised her hand. "How long before we work on actual ships?" 2 weeks, Strauss said. "Maybe 3 if you need extra practice, but here's the thing. You're not going to learn 20 different kinds of welding. You're going to learn one kind, and you're going to practice it until you can do it in your sleep in the dark, with your eyes closed." He walked to the first station and demonstrated, striking an arc, laying down a bead of molten metal that cooled into a perfect, smooth joint. The motion's consistent, the angle is consistent, the speed is consistent. Welding isn't magic, it's physics. You control the variables, you control the outcome. For the next hour, the trainees practiced striking arcs, controlling the rod, maintaining the right distance and angle. Kaiser watched Dorothy struggle through her first dozen attempts, then suddenly find the rhythm. Her 15th weld was clean, her 20th was nearly perfect. "She'll be on a ship in 10 days, Strauss said quietly to Kaiser. "Maybe sooner." "How many are training right now?" "This class is 24. We're running 6 classes a day, staggered. By end of month, we'll have trained 300 welders. By end of year," he shrugged, "as many as you need." Kaiser nodded slowly. "Bill, what do the traditional shipbuilders say about this approach?" Strauss laughed without humor. "They say it's dangerous. They say welded ships are death traps. They say women can't do this work, that it requires too much strength, too much skill." He gestured at Dorothy, who was laying down another perfect bead. "They're wrong on every count. Women are often better welders than men. Smaller hands, better fine motor control, more patience. And as for strength, arc welding doesn't require much physical power. It requires precision." "Keep training them," Kaiser said. "And Bill, document everything, every training method, every success, every innovation. When this works, and it will work, other industries are going to want to know how we did it." Richmond, California, July 1942. The prefabrication concept was simple in theory. Build the ship in pieces, then assemble the pieces. In practice, it required reimagining every aspect of shipbuilding. Kaiser stood in Fabrication Building C watching a crew assemble a double-bottom section, the complex network of plates and frames that would form the floor of a cargo hold. Traditionally, this work would happen in the cramped, dark interior of a ship under construction, with workers contorting themselves into impossible positions to install rivets or make welds. Here, the section was being built at waist height on a specialized jig. The workers moved around it easily, each performing their specific task. Tack welders positioned in the frames, production welders making the permanent joints, inspectors checking each seam. The work was fast, efficient, and most importantly, repeatable. "How long to complete this section?" Kaiser asked the foreman. 8 hours with this crew, 6 if we get a really good team. The foreman patted the steel affectionately. "Once it's done, we'll move it outside, load it on a truck, drive it to the shipway, and crane it into position. What used to take 3 days in a cramped hull now takes 1 day in a well-lit shop." Kaiser examined a completed bulkhead section waiting to be moved. It was massive, 20 feet tall, 15 feet wide, weighing several tons. "How precise are the tolerances?" "Within a quarter inch, has to be, or the sections won't fit together at final assembly." "And they do fit together?" The foreman smiled. "Like Lego blocks, Mr. Kaiser. Like Lego blocks." Outside, the shipways themselves were beginning to take their final form. Each way was essentially a massive concrete ramp leading down to the water, wide enough to accommodate a 441-foot-long, 57-foot-wide hull. Overhead, rolling cranes on rails could lift and position sections weighing up to 50 tons. Kaiser's vision had been to move as much work as possible off the shipways. If 80% of the ship could be built in prefabricated sections, then the actual time on the ways could be reduced from months to weeks. The shipways became assembly areas rather than construction zones, bottlenecks transformed into throughways. Edward Thompson, Kaiser's vice president of production, joined him overlooking Shipway 1. First keel goes down next week, SS Patrick Henry, hull number 1. Time to completion? Current estimate is 150 days from keel laying to launch, but that's with a green crew still learning the process. Once we refine the methods, once the workers know their jobs, Thompson shrugged, could be half that. It needs to be, Kaiser said. The Maritime Commission ordered 60 ships to be delivered by year's end. We're 4 months behind other yards that started earlier. We need to build faster. Henry, we're already building faster than anyone thought possible. Faster than anyone thought possible last year. This year, possible needs to be redefined. Kaiser turned to face Thompson. Ed, I've been doing some calculations. The bottleneck isn't the fabrication. We can build sections faster than we can assemble them. The bottleneck is time on the ways. Right now, we're planning to build ships sequentially. Start one, finish it, launch it, start the next. That's how everyone builds ships. What if we didn't? Kaiser's voice took on the intensity Thompson recognized. An idea crystallizing, a new approach emerging. What if we started a new ship every week, regardless of whether the previous ship is finished? We'd have multiple ships under construction simultaneously, each at a different stage. Week 1, lay the keel. Week 2, lay the next keel while installing the first bottom sections on ship 1. Week 3, start ship 3 while continuing work on ships 1 and 2. Thompson was quiet, visualizing the logistics. That would require incredible coordination, precise scheduling, every section ready, exactly when needed, every crew knowing exactly where to be. But it's possible? Theoretically, Thompson rubbed his jaw. Henry, if you pull this off, if you can actually orchestrate that level of complexity, you won't just be building ships fast. You'll be building them at a rate no one imagined possible. Then let's make the imaginary real, Kaiser said. Start working out the schedules. I want the first ship in the water by September. Richmond, California, September 27th, 1941. Liberty Fleet Day dawned clear and cold, the San Francisco Bay glittering under autumn sun. 14 Liberty ships were scheduled to launch that day from yards across America, a coordinated event designed to demonstrate American industrial capacity to both allies and enemies. At Richmond Shipyard No. 1, the SS Patrick Henry sat on the ways, ready to slide into the water. She was not beautiful. President Roosevelt had been diplomatically accurate when he called these ships ugly ducklings. The Patrick Henry was a rectangle with a pointed front, 441 feet of flat-sided welded steel that looked more like a floating warehouse than a proper ship. But she was complete, ahead of schedule, and she was exactly what the war demanded. The crowd gathering for the launch included Maritime Commission officials, naval inspectors, representatives from the Steel Workers Union, and hundreds of the workers who'd built her. Kaiser stood on the platform with Edgar, watching the shipyard he'd created fill with people. Nervous? Edgar asked. Terrified, Henry admitted. If this doesn't work, if she doesn't launch cleanly, if the inspectors find critical flaws, if any of 100 things go wrong, the program is finished before it starts. A naval inspector approached. Commander Hayes, a career officer with 30 years of shipbuilding oversight experience. Mr. Kaiser, we've completed our final inspection. Kaiser felt his stomach clench. And Hayes' face was carefully neutral. Your welding exceeds specifications. Your hull integrity tests are excellent. Your engineering systems are properly installed. He paused, and Kaiser could see him choosing his words carefully. Mr. Kaiser, I've been inspecting ships for 3 decades. I've seen work by the finest shipyards in America, built by men who've spent their entire lives learning the craft. Your ship was built in 7 months by workers who'd never seen a shipyard before this year. Commander, Hayes held up a hand. I'm not finished. Your ship is not built the way I would have built it. It's not built the way any traditional yard would have built it, but it is, by every measurable standard, a sound vessel. He extended his hand. Congratulations, Mr. Kaiser. She's cleared for launch. The ceremony itself was brief. Roosevelt's voice crackled over loudspeakers. His radio address broadcast from Washington. These ships will bring liberty to Europe. They are tangible evidence of our determination to help those who resist tyranny. Kaiser's speech was shorter. This ship, and all those that will follow, represent something new. They were not built by master craftsmen, though the work is masterful. They were built by ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things. To every worker who drove a weld, fitted a plate, or tightened a bolt, this ship is yours. Be proud. At precisely 2 p.m., the restraining blocks were knocked away. For a moment, the Patrick Henry sat motionless, 10,000 tons of steel defying gravity. Then, with a groan of metal on wood and a spray of grease, she began to slide. The movement was agonizingly slow at first, then faster, the great hull accelerating down the ways. She hit the water with a massive splash, displaced volume, creating waves that radiated across the bay. For a few seconds, she rode deep. Then her natural buoyancy asserted itself, and she rose, floating free, a ship in truth now and not just in name. The crowd erupted in cheers. Workers who'd spent months preparing this moment embraced, laughed, some wept. Kaiser watched it all with a mixture of relief and something else, a recognition that this moment, this ship, was the beginning of something unprecedented. That night in his office overlooking the now empty shipway, Kaiser met with his senior staff. The champagne had been drunk, the celebrations begun, but this room was quiet, focused. "Gentlemen," Kaiser said, "we've proven we can build a ship. Now we need to prove we can build 100. The Patrick Henry took 244 days from keel laying to launch. We need to cut that time in half, then in half again." "That's impossible," someone said reflexively, then stopped embarrassed. Kaiser smiled. "How many times have I heard that word in the last year? The shipyard is impossible. The training program is impossible. Building with unskilled labor is impossible." He gestured toward the window, toward the bay where the Patrick Henry floated. "And yet," he unrolled a new set of plans on the table. "I've been studying Ford's assembly line in detail. The key insight isn't speed, it's flow. Continuous, uninterrupted flow of materials and workers. Right now, we're building ships in stages, with gaps between stages where nothing happens. We wait for sections, wait for inspections, wait for the next phase. That waiting is wasted time." "What's your solution?" Thompson asked. "Eliminate waiting," Kaiser said simply. "Start a new ship every week. Keep material flowing into fabrication buildings continuously. Schedule every operation down to the hour. When a section is complete, it goes immediately to the shipway. No waiting, no gaps. Just continuous flow from raw steel to finished ship." He looked around the table. "I know this sounds extreme. I know it will require precision we've never achieved before. But think about what we're racing against. Right now, tonight, there are U-boats hunting in the Atlantic. Tomorrow, they'll sink more ships. The day after, more ships. Every day we don't have a Liberty ship in the water is a day we're losing the race." Calhoun spoke up. "Henry, what you're describing, this level of coordination, this speed, it's never been done in shipbuilding." "No," Kaiser agreed. "It hasn't, which means when we do it, we'll have changed shipbuilding forever." He rolled up the plans. "Get some rest, gentlemen. Tomorrow we start building the second ship, and the third, and the fourth. We're going to build ships so fast that the Germans won't believe it, so fast that our own Navy won't believe it, so fast that we'll barely believe it ourselves." As the meeting broke up, Thompson lingered. "Henry, can I ask you something? Why are you pushing this hard? We've proven the concept. The Maritime Commission is happy. We could build at a sustainable pace, still meet our contracts." Kaiser walked to the window, looking out at the dark bay where the Patrick Henry sat at anchor, her running lights glowing. "Ed, do you know how many men died in the Atlantic last month? 1,847. That's not ships. That's men. Individuals with families, with dreams, with lives that matter." He turned back to Thompson. "Every ship we build might save 100 lives, maybe more. So yes, I'm pushing hard. Because while we're having meetings and drawing schedules and calculating profit margins, men are drowning and freezing water." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I didn't get into shipbuilding to make money, Ed. I got into it because someone showed me the numbers and asked if I could help solve the problem. The answer was yes, but solving it means more than just building ships. It means building them fast enough to actually matter." Thompson nodded slowly. "Then we better get started." "We already have," Kaiser said. The moment the Patrick Henry hit the water, the race truly began. Now we find out if we can win it. Outside in the darkness, the shipyard was already preparing for the next day's work. Cranes being positioned, sections being fabricated, welders practicing their craft. The assembly line was starting to move, and once it started, Henry Kaiser had no intention of letting it stop until the war was won. The dam builder had reinvented the ship. Now he needed to reinvent the factory that built them, and he had less than a year to prove it would work. Richmond, California, January 1943. The train pulled into Richmond Station at 4:47 a.m., 23 minutes late, carrying 847 passengers. Where it was designed to hold 400, they spilled onto the platform in the pre-dawn darkness. Men and women with cardboard suitcases and cloth bundles, children clinging to parents' hands, faces showing exhaustion and hope in equal measure. Easting Counter stepped off the train into air that smelled of salt water and steel and something she couldn't quite identify. Possibility, maybe, or just the particular scent of a city transforming itself faster than anyone could quite comprehend. She was 26 years old, had left Louisiana 3 days earlier with $12 in her purse and a newspaper clipping advertising jobs at the Kaiser Shipyards. The clipping promised good wages, housing assistance, and opportunities for all qualified workers. She had no idea what qualified meant for shipbuilding, but she knew what it meant in Louisiana, not for colored girls who'd spent their lives waiting tables. First time in Richmond? The woman beside her was white, maybe 40, with tired eyes and a Midwest accent. First time in California, Easting replied. Me too, came from Iowa, heard they're hiring everyone. Doesn't matter if you're a woman, doesn't matter your age. She hefted her suitcase. My husband's in North Africa, our farm's gone to dust. Figured I'd rather build ships than sit home starving. A Kaiser representative was moving through the crowd, shouting directions. New arrivals for shipyard employment, proceed to the buses. Housing assignments will be made after your interview. First shift starts at 6 a.m. You'll make it if you hurry. Easton joined the flow of people toward a line of buses. Around her, conversations were a mix of accents and languages, Southern drawl, Spanish, something that might have been Polish. The war had created a gravity well, pulling people from across the country to this industrial vortex on San Francisco Bay. The city that rolled past the bus windows bore little resemblance to the Richmond of 2 years earlier. Where there had been 20,000 residents, there were now approaching 100,000. Entire neighborhoods had appeared overnight. Rows of identical housing built with the same prefabrication efficiency as the ships, painted in dull military colors. The streets were crowded even at this hour. Workers coming off night shift passing workers heading to day shift in a continuous rotation. The bus turned a corner, and suddenly the shipyards were visible. Easting had never seen anything like it. 4 massive yards stretched along the waterfront, blazing with light from thousands of arc lamps. Cranes rose against the sky like mechanical giants, and everywhere, welding sparks cascading down from hull plates like orange waterfalls, so many that the entire scene flickered with their light. "Geez it," someone whispered. "That's where we're going to work?" The bus stopped at a processing center that had been, 6 months earlier, a warehouse. Now it was a human sorting facility, efficiently categorizing new arrivals based on skills, physical capability, and immediate need. Easting waited in line for 2 hours. When her turn came, the interviewer barely looked up from his clipboard. Name? Easting Counter. Previous work experience? Waitress, 5 years. Can you lift 50 pounds? She blinked. Yes. Afraid of heights? No. Good with your hands? I suppose so. The interviewer made notes. You're assigned to Shipyard 3, scaling crew. Report to Building 12 for equipment issue and training. Training is 3 days. You'll work on hulls, removing slag and smoothing welds. Pay is 90 cents an hour, time and a half after 8 hours. You'll work an 8-hour shift, probably swing shift starting at 4 p.m. Any questions? Easting's mind was reeling. What's a scaling crew? The interviewer finally looked at her. After welders join steel plates, there's rough metal left behind. Slag, spatter, uneven surfaces. Your job is to clean that up, make it smooth. You'll use chipping hammers, grinders, wire brushes. It's physical work, it's loud, and You'll need to be careful, but it's essential. Ships can't be inspected properly until scaling's done." "I can do that," Eastine said with more confidence than she felt. "Housing assignment is Section 7, Unit 42B. You'll share with 3 other women. Rent is $21 a month deducted from pay. Medical insurance is 50 cents a week. Child care is available if needed." Next, she was ushered to another line, issued coveralls, work boots, safety goggles, and gloves. Then to another line for housing assignment. Then to a bus that would take her to her new home. It was 9 a.m. She'd been in Richmond for 4 hours and already had a job, a place to live, and a shift assignment. In Louisiana, it had taken her 3 weeks to find work as a waitress. Richmond, California, February 1943. Phyllis Gould had been a stenographer in Sacramento before the war. She'd spent her days typing legal documents in an office that smelled of old paper and furniture polish, earning $30 a week and wondering if this was what her life would always be. Now she stood on a scaffold 40 feet above the ground, a welding rod in her hand, looking at a seam where 2 massive steel plates met. The heat from her previous weld still radiated through her gloves. Through her helmet's dark lens, the world was reduced to the bright point where metal would soon melt. "Okay, Gould," her supervisor's voice came through the noise. "Let's see if you remember yesterday's lesson." She struck an arc, that satisfying moment when electricity jumped the gap and metal began to flow. The key was consistency, right distance, right angle, right speed. Too fast and the weld was weak. Too slow and you got excessive buildup, just right. And the molten metal flowed into the joint like liquid glass, creating a bond stronger than the steel itself. 30 seconds later, she lifted her helmet and examined the bead. Straight, consistent, no voids or inclusions. Perfect. "Not bad for week 2, the supervisor said. "You got the touch. Some people fight the rod. You're working with it." "My mother taught me to sew," Phyllis said. "This isn't that different. You're just sewing with metal." The supervisor laughed. Never heard it put that way, but yeah. "You're hired. Report to Shipway 4 tomorrow, 6 a.m. You'll be on hull crew, closing seams on Liberty Hull number 247. That evening, back in her shared housing unit, Phyllis discovered her hands shaking as she tried to hold a cup of coffee, not from fear, from exhilaration. She was 23 years old, and she'd just been told she could do something most people thought was impossible. Her roommate, Margaret, came in from swing shift, still in coveralls, her hair wrapped in the red polka dot bandana that had become ubiquitous among women workers. "How'd training go?" "I'm on a hull crew tomorrow. Actual ship work," Margaret grinned. "Welcome to the club." She poured her own coffee. "You hear about the child care center? The one Kaiser built? Opens next week. State of the art, they're saying. Hot meals for the kids, trained staff, open 24 hours to match all 3 shifts. Margaret shook her head. "My sister back in Ohio is paying her neighbor $5 a week to watch her kids in a house with no heat. Here I'll pay the same and my daughter gets trained teachers and hot food." "Kaiser's smart," Phyllis said. "Can't have women working if their kids aren't cared for." "It's more than smart. It's revolutionary." Margaret sat down, suddenly serious. "Phyllis, do you realize what's happening here? Women are doing work that everyone said we couldn't do. We're earning real money. Good money. We're proving that all those rules about what women can and can't do were just rules, not laws of nature. Just rules men made up." Phyllis thought about the weld she'd made that day, the metal flowing under her control, the approval in her supervisor's voice. "You think it'll last after the war?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. They'll want their jobs back, the men coming home. There'll be pressure for us to go back to kitchens and offices. But here's what I know. From this point on, I'll always think I can do anything I want to do. And that's something no one can take away." Richmond, California, April 1943. James Chen had been a mechanical engineer in San Francisco before Pearl Harbor. As a second-generation Chinese-American, he'd faced barriers his entire career. Firms that wouldn't hire him, projects he was excluded from. The subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination that was simply how the world worked. The Kaiser Shipyards had hired him in 15 minutes. Now he stood in the fabrication building's engineering office, looking at a problem that had been plaguing production for 2 weeks. The double-bottom sections, the complex assemblies that formed the floor of the cargo holds, were taking 8 hours to fabricate. The schedule called for 6. "We're 2 hours over target on every section," the production manager was saying. "We've tried adding workers, but they just get in each other's way. The workspace is too confined." James examined the assembly jig, the complex frame that held the pieces in position while they were welded. Workers were contorting themselves around it, reaching through gaps to make welds in awkward positions. "The problem isn't the workers," James said. "It's the geometry. We're making them work around the jig instead of making the jig work for them." He grabbed a pencil and paper. "What if we redesigned this? Split the assembly into 2 sub-assemblies, build them separately, then join them. The workers would have clear access to every weld point. That would require new jigs, new training, time we don't have." "How much time do we lose continuing like this?" James countered. 2 hours per section, 6 sections per ship, 60 ships. He did the math. 720 wasted hours per ship. Multiply that by every ship we'll build. He looked up. "Sir, the time we invest in fixing this now will pay back 100 times over." The manager studied James's sketch. "Can you have a prototype jig ready in a week?" 3 days, James said. 4 days later, the first double-bottom section was completed using the new process. Time, 4 hours, 30 minutes. James watched workers move efficiently through their tasks, each weld accessible, each worker with room to work. "Chen," the production manager's voice carried across the building, "your design works. We're implementing it across all fabrication buildings. Oh, and the boss wants to see you." "Henry." Kaiser's office was Spartanly furnished. A desk, chairs, a drafting table, and walls covered with production charts and ship schedules. Kaiser himself was on the phone when James arrived, but he gestured for him to sit. "No, Admiral, I understand the Navy's concerns, but the testing data is clear." Kaiser listened for a moment, his expression patient. "Yes, sir, I'll have the complete report to you by Friday." He hung up and turned to James. "You're Chen, the engineer who just saved us 2 hours per section?" "Yes, sir. I've been reviewing improvement suggestions. You've submitted 14 in the last 3 months. 11 have been implemented. You've personally saved this operation approximately 9,000 man-hours." Kaiser leaned back. "Why?" James was confused. "Why what, sir?" "Why are you working this hard? Why do you care this much? You're salaried. You don't get paid extra for these innovations." James thought about how to answer. "Mr. Kaiser, do you know what it's like to spend your entire career being told you're not good enough, that your work will never be trusted because of how you look?" He met Kaiser's gaze. "You hired me based on my engineering degree and my experience, not my last name, not my ethnicity. You asked if I could do the job, and when I said yes, you believed me." He gestured at the window at the shipyard beyond. "Every ship we build might save lives. Every hour we save means we build ships faster, which means fewer men drown in the Atlantic. So yes, I care. I care because the work matters, and because for the first time in my life, I'm being judged purely on the quality of my work." Kaiser was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Chen, how would you like to run the entire fabrication engineering division? It's 50 people, all the fabrication buildings across all 4 yards. Your job would be to find inefficiencies and fix them exactly like you've been doing, but with authority and resources." James felt his breath catch. "I'm 29 years old, sir. So, I started building dams at 30. Age is irrelevant. Competence is what matters." Kaiser stood, extending his hand. "We're building more than ships here, Mr. Chen. We're building a new way of working, a new way of thinking about who can do what. You're living proof that the old rules were just obstacles we needed to remove." That evening, James wrote to his parents in San Francisco. He told them about the promotion, about the work, about the strange, intense atmosphere of Richmond, where nothing seemed impossible because impossible had stopped being a meaningful word. He didn't tell them about the racism that still existed, the workers who wouldn't take orders from a Chinese supervisor, the housing complexes that quietly refused to rent to Asian families, the small indignities that persisted even in this supposedly progressive environment. But he did tell them that for the first time his work was being judged on its merits. And that, he wrote, was progress. Not complete, not perfect, but real. Richmond, California, June 1943. The Maritime Child Development Center opened on a Monday morning to a line of parents that stretched around the block. Mary Sullivan stood in that line holding her 3-year-old daughter, Emma, feeling both hopeful and terrified. "Mommy, where are we going?" Emma asked for the 5th time. "To a special place where you'll play while Mommy works," Mary said, trying to sound confident. Mary's husband was in the Pacific driving a landing craft somewhere she wasn't allowed to know about. Her mother had died the previous year. Her choices had been simple: find childcare or lose her job. And losing her job meant losing her apartment, losing her income, and potentially losing everything. The center itself was purpose-built, designed specifically for the children of shipyard workers. Inside, it was bright and clean with trained teachers, educational materials, and Mary could hardly believe it, a kitchen that would provide hot meals. "Mrs. Sullivan," a teacher approached, kneeling to Emma's level. "Hi, Emma, my name is Miss Peterson. Would you like to see where you'll play?" Emma hid behind Mary's leg, but peeked out with cautious interest. Miss Peterson smiled. "We have blocks and dolls and a play area outside. And at lunchtime we have chicken and vegetables. Do you like chicken?" Emma nodded slowly. The enrollment process was efficient. Kaiser's people had designed it with the same systematic approach they use for everything else. Mary filled out forms, paid her $5 per week fee, received a schedule card showing exactly when she could drop off and pick up Emma based on her shift rotation. "The center's open 24 hours, the administrator explained. "All 3 shifts are covered. We have teachers for every age from infant to 5 years old. Hot meals 3 times daily. Medical staff on site. If Emma gets sick, we'll contact you immediately." "This is..." Mary struggled for words. "I've never heard of anything like this." "There's never been anything like this," the administrator said, pride evident in her voice. "Mr. Kaiser insisted, said we can't ask women to work if they're worried about their children, so we built this." She gestured at the facility around them. "State of the art. Best practices from educational theory. We're not just warehousing kids, we're educating them." That afternoon, Mary stood on a scaffold on the SS Frederick Douglass, chipping slag from a weld seam. The work was physical, demanding, and she loved it, but now, for the first time since starting at the shipyards, she could focus completely on the task. Emma was safe, fed, cared for by professionals. A picture formed in Mary's mind, a future where this was normal, where women could work and have children without having to choose between them, where society supported both instead of forcing an impossible decision. Then her shift supervisor called for the next section, and Mary returned to her work, the vision tucked away but not forgotten. Richmond, California, August 1943. The cafeteria during shift change was chaos. 2,000 workers trying to eat in a space designed for 800. Lines stretching out the doors, noise levels that made conversation nearly impossible. Robert Martinez stood in line, his lunch pail in hand, watching the crowd. At 53, he was older than most of the workers. The injury that had cost him 2 fingers on his left hand had also kept him out of the draft and out of most peacetime jobs. But Kaiser's Shipyards had looked at his missing fingers, asked if he could still grip tools, and hired him when he said yes. Now he was a ship fitter, one of the skilled positions that required reading blueprints and precise measurements. The missing fingers didn't matter. His mind was sharp, his remaining digits worked fine, and he'd discovered a talent for visualizing how flat steel plates would form into 3-dimensional hull sections. "Martinez," a younger worker waved him over. "Sit with us." Robert joined a table that held a cross-section of the shipyard. 2 women welders, a black man who worked scaling crew, a white teenager who couldn't have been more than 18, and an older woman who supervised a rigging team. "Question," one of the welders said. "Why are we pushing so hard? I heard we're ahead of schedule. Why not ease up, build at a sustainable pace?" The older supervisor, her name was Helen, answered. "Because men are dying, Sarah. Every day we don't have a ship in the water is a day more sailors drown." "But we're just workers," Sarah protested. "We're not deciding strategy. We're not commanding forces. How much difference can we really make?" Robert spoke up quietly. My nephew is in the Merchant Marine. He's 19 years old, and he crosses the Atlantic carrying fuel oil. Do you know what happens if a torpedo hits a fuel tanker? It doesn't sink, it explodes. Men don't drown, they burn. The table was silent. Every Liberty ship we build, Robert continued, is one more ship carrying supplies, which means one less trip for ships like the one my nephew is on. It means convoys can be bigger, which means better protection. It means faster delivery, which means shorter time in the danger zone. He met Sarah's eyes. So yes, I think we make a difference. Every rivet, every weld, every plate we fit, they all matter. The young teenager spoke up. My brother's over there, infantry. He writes that the supplies are getting through now. Food, ammo, equipment, it's all arriving. He smiled slightly. He doesn't know I'm part of that. I can't tell him in letters. But someday, when this is over, I'm going to tell him. I built the ships that kept you alive. Helen raised her coffee cup. To the work then, and to bringing them all home. They touched cups, paper against paper, making no sound. But the gesture meant something, this moment of connection among people who'd been strangers 6 months ago, and who would likely scatter back to their separate lives when the war ended. But for now, in this cafeteria, in this shipyard, in this city that had exploded from nothing into industrial intensity, they were united by purpose. They were building ships, and ships meant survival. Richmond, California, December 1943. The statistics were staggering. In 24 months, Richmond's population had increased by 4%. The shipyards employed 90,000 workers across 3 shifts. Housing was perpetually insufficient. Families doubled up in apartments designed for one. Workers slept in shifts in hot beds where the sheets never had time to cool. Temporary barracks sprouted like industrial mushrooms. The social tension was inevitable. Longtime residents resented the newcomers. White workers complained about working alongside blacks. Men grumbled about women taking their jobs. The housing shortage created competition and conflict. The bars were overcrowded, the schools overwhelmed. The infrastructure strained past breaking, but the ships kept coming. By the end of 1943, the Richmond yards alone had launched 247 Liberty ships. The average construction time had dropped from 204 days to 42 days. 3 complete ships were sliding down the ways every single week. Henry Kaiser stood in his office late one December night, looking at production charts. He was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that came from 2 years of 16-hour days, from constant problem solving, from the weight of knowing that delays meant deaths. Edgar entered with coffee. You should go home, Father, get some sleep. In a minute, Henry traced a line on the chart, production rate over time. It formed a steep upward curve, almost exponential. Do you realize what we've done, Edgar? We've turned shipbuilding from a craft into an industry. We've trained 90,000 people to do work they never imagined they could do. We've built 247 ships where experts said we'd build maybe 50. And you're killing yourself in the process, Edgar said bluntly. When's the last time you took a day off? Henry smiled tiredly. I'll rest when the war's over. He turned from the chart. But you're right that I'm tired and conflicted. About what? We've proven the concept, Henry said. Assembly line shipbuilding works. The ships are sound, the workers are capable, the production rate exceeds anything imagined. But at what cost? He gestured vaguely toward the city beyond. We've created a boom town with all the problems that entails. We've pushed workers to their limits. Women are doing back-breaking labor. Elderly men are working jobs that are physically demanding. People are living in conditions that aren't sustainable long-term. But it is saving lives, Edgar pointed out. Every ship we build— I know, Henry interrupted. I know the calculation. I run it every day. Ships built versus lives saved, and the math works. But Edgar, sometimes late at night, I wonder about the cost we can't measure. The stress, the exhaustion, the families separated, the normal lives disrupted. He shook his head. War demands sacrifice. Understand that. I just hope when this is over that we remember the people who made those sacrifices. Edgar was quiet for a moment. Father, you built a health care system for the workers. You built child care centers. You hired people everyone else rejected. You paid fair wages. If this is exploitation, it's the most benevolent exploitation in industrial history. It's still exploitation, Henry said softly. Necessary, perhaps. Justified by circumstance, but let's not pretend these people are here because they love building ships. They're here because war created economic opportunity, and they're taking it because it's better than the alternatives. Does that make it wrong? No, it makes it complicated. Henry finished his coffee. Come on. You're right that I need sleep. Tomorrow we're starting hull number 248 and 249 and 250. The work doesn't stop just because I'm philosophical. They walked through the empty shipyard, past silent cranes and darkened workshops. But in the distance, on the night shift, lights blazed and welding sparks fell like stars. The work never truly stopped. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the assembly line moved. Richmond, California had been a city of 20,000. Now it was an industrial colossus of 100,000 and still growing. The transformation was violence done to geography, to community, to the normal pace of human life. But it was also hope. Hope for workers finding good wages. Hope for women proving their capability. Hope for minorities finding opportunities that peacetime would have denied them. Hope for a nation that the tools of survival were being built fast enough to matter. The city had exploded, and from that explosion, ships were born. Ugly, functional, essential ships that would cross oceans and carry the materials of war, and ultimately help shift the balance from desperation to victory. But the human cost, the stress, the sacrifice, the disrupted lives that Bill would come due later. For now, there was only the work and the ships, and the relentless mathematics of war that demanded both. The challenge arrived in the form of a question from a reporter. Henry Kaiser had just finished touring the Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation yard in Portland, where workers had completed the SS Joseph N. Teal in 10 days, a record that had made headlines across the country. "Mr. Kaiser," the reporter called out, "could it be done faster?" Kaiser paused, his hand on the car door. The question hung in the air, and he could feel the weight of possibility pressing against the boundaries of the practical. 10 days. 240 hours. Could it be done faster? Yes, he said simply, and climbed into the car. By the time he reached Richmond that evening, the decision had crystallized. Not just faster, dramatically faster. Fast enough to capture the world's attention. Fast enough to send a message to Berlin that American industrial capacity was not just superior, but overwhelming. Fast enough to prove that the impossible was merely the improbable awaiting proper execution. Richmond, California, Permanente Metals, Shipyard, number 2, November 5th, 1942. The planning meeting filled the conference room with every senior manager, engineer, and supervisor from Shipyard 2. Kaiser stood at the head of the table, and behind him a chalkboard displayed a number, 96 hours. 4 days, Kaiser said, from keel laying to launch, the SS Robert E. Peary, hull number 440. We're going to build a complete Liberty ship in 4 days. The silence was absolute. Then everyone started talking at once. It's impossible. The welding alone. You can't prefabricate that fast. Kaiser let them talk for 30 seconds, then held up his hand. The room quieted. Gentlemen, I didn't say it would be easy. I said, we're going to do it. Now the question isn't whether, it's how. So let's figure out how. Edward Thompson, the production manager, was the first to engage seriously. Henry, the Teal took 10 days with extensive prefabrication and a coordinated effort. You're asking for less than half that time. The bottlenecks are assembly time on the ways and the sheer number of welds required, approximately 50 miles of welding per ship. Then we reduce assembly time and increase welding capacity, Kaiser said. Chad, what's our limiting factor on the ways? Chad Calhoun, the naval architect, had been studying the problem since Kaiser's pronouncement in the car. Crane capacity and workspace. We can only position so many workers on the hull at once. Too many, and they interfere with each other. Right now, optimal crew size for way work is about 200 workers per shift. So we optimize crew placement, Kaiser said. No wasted movement, no idle time, no waiting for the next section. James? He looked at James Chen, who now ran fabrication engineering. Can we have every section ready exactly when needed? No delays, no waiting? James nodded slowly. If we know the exact schedule hour by hour, we can stage sections in sequence. But, Henry, the precision required, we'd need to know at 8 a.m. or break on day 2 that we'll need stern frame section 3 at 8:47 a.m. 15 minutes early and it's in the way, 15 minutes late, and we're losing time. Then we create that schedule, Kaiser said, down to the minute if necessary. This isn't just about building fast, it's about building with precision that makes speed possible. He turned to the chalkboard and began writing. We start at midnight, November 8th. That's a Sunday. Minimal traffic, maximum focus. We'll have 3 shifts working continuously. 8 hours on, minimal breaks. We'll pre-position every section, every tool, every consumable. Workers will know exactly where to be at exactly what time. You're choreographing it, said Helen Morrison, one of the shift supervisors. Like a dance. Exactly like a dance, Kaiser agreed. A 250,000-part dance performed by 2,000 workers over 96 hours. He looked around the table. I know this sounds insane, but consider what we're really doing. We're not inventing new techniques. Everything we'll do, we've already done. We're just doing it faster. With better coordination, the sections are already designed. The workers are already trained. The systems are already in place. We're just optimizing execution. Why? Someone asked. Why take this risk? If something goes wrong, it's a very public failure. Kaiser's expression grew serious. Because right now, German propaganda is telling the world that American industrial capacity is overrated, that we can't possibly outproduce the Reich. They're telling their soldiers that Allied supply lines are fragile, that the blockade is working. I want to send a different message. I want to show the world that we can build a ship in less time than it takes them to plan an operation. He paused, then added more quietly, and I want our workers to know what they're capable of. We've been building ships in 42 days, which is remarkable, but I know they can do more. And when they build this ship in 4 days, they'll never again doubt what's possible. Richmond, California, November 6th, 7th, 1942. The preparation was as intense as the execution would be. Every section that would form the Robert E. Peary was prefabricated and positioned in sequence. A team of planners created a minute-by-minute schedule. 12:01 a.m. Lay keel plates. 12:47 a.m. Position forward, bottom section. 1:23 a.m. Begin welding starboard seam. The schedule filled 23 pages of single-space typing. Workers were briefed in small groups, each group learning their specific role. Dorothy Martinez, who'd been welding for 8 months now, attended a session where her supervisor walked through her assignment with exacting detail. You'll be on the port side hull, station 47, from hour 18 to hour 26. Your job is closing seams on the second deck. You'll make approximately 140 welds. Each weld should take 4 to 6 minutes. Any problems? Signal the roving inspector. Don't stop to troubleshoot. Questions? Dorothy had one. What if I finish early? Move to the next station and help. But don't rush. Quality is still paramount. A ship built in 4 days that fails inspection is just an expensive publicity stunt. A ship built in 4 days that passes every test is a miracle. The press was gathering, reporters from newspapers across the country, newsreel cameras, Navy observers, British Admiralty representatives. The entire enterprise was becoming a spectacle, and Kaiser was leaning into it, understanding that the propaganda value was as important as the achievement itself. But privately, he was terrified. He'd bet his reputation, his company's credibility, and potentially the confidence of 90,000 workers on this attempt. If it failed, if the ship couldn't launch, if critical flaws were discovered, if the effort collapsed into chaos, the damage would be immeasurable. Too late to back out now, Edgar said, finding his father alone in the office the night before the attempt. I know, Henry replied. I just keep running through everything that could go wrong. Steel delivery delayed, crane malfunction, worker injury, weather, any of 1,000 things. So why do it? Henry turned from the window. Because, Ed, we're in a race. Every day we're racing against U-boats, against time, against the mathematics of attrition. And sometimes in a race, you need to prove to yourself and to your opponents that you're faster than they thought possible. This isn't about one ship. It's about changing the psychology of the war. He smiled slightly. Besides, I've never been good at accepting limitations. Richmond, California, November 8th, 1942, 12:01 a.m. The keel of the SS Robert E. Peary touched the blocks at exactly 12:01 a.m. The heavy steel plates, already pre-cut, pre-drilled, pre-positioned, were lowered into place by cranes whose operators had rehearsed the movements for 3 days. Welders moved in immediately, their arc lights blazing in the darkness. The first welds were critical. The keel had to be perfectly aligned, perfectly level, or everything that followed would be compromised. James Chen stood in the control tower with the master schedule, watching the organized chaos below. Workers moved with purpose, no wasted motion, each person knowing exactly where they needed to be. Sections arrived on trucks and were immediately hoisted into position. The ship was growing visibly, steel bones taking shape. "Hour 1 on schedule," he called out. By 2 a.m., the bottom plating was installed. By 4 a.m., the first bulkheads were in place. By 6 a.m., when the day shift arrived to relieve the night crew, the ship had a recognizable form, flat bottom with vertical walls rising from it. Workers coming on shift stopped and stared. "Jesus," someone whispered. That's 6 hours of work." The day shift took over without breaking rhythm. The choreography was holding, sections arriving exactly on time, cranes swinging in coordinated movements, welders closing seams in continuous progression. The ship was an organism growing in real time, steel cells multiplying, structure emerging from organized chaos. Dorothy started her shift at 2:00 p.m., climbing to Station 47 with her welding rig. The second deck was framed but not yet plated. She could see through the skeleton of the ship, see other welders working on other levels, see the entire three-dimensional puzzle taking shape. "Ready, Martinez?" her partner asked, another welder named Sarah, who'd started the same week Dorothy had. "Ready," Dorothy replied and struck her first arc. For the next 8 hours, she existed in a focused bubble. Strike arc, lay bead, move to next joint, repeat. Her hands knew the motion so well they'd become automatic. Her mind was free to appreciate the larger process, the ship growing around her, the coordinated effort of hundreds of workers all moving in sync. At 10 p.m., when her shift ended, she climbed down and looked back at the hull. In 8 hours, the entire second deck had been installed. The ship now had 2 complete levels. In less than 24 hours, it had gone from keel plates to a recognizable vessel. "We're going to do it," Sarah said beside her, voice full of wonder. "We're actually going to do it." Richmond, California, November 9th, 10th, 1942. Day 2 was decking and superstructure. The hull was structurally complete. Now it needed floors, walls, and the deck houses that would contain crew quarters and navigation equipment. The work continued without pause. Night shift, day shift, swing shift, each picking up exactly where the last left off. The schedule was holding, sections arriving on time, cranes moving in rhythm. A few minor problems emerged. A section that didn't quite fit, requiring quick adjustment. A welder who injured his hand and had to be replaced. A crane that briefly malfunctioned and was swapped out within 30 minutes. But these were minor perturbations in a system that was miraculously working as designed. Henry Kaiser didn't sleep. He couldn't. He moved through the shipyard, watching the work, talking to supervisors, checking progress against the schedule. Hour 28, on time. Hour 32, slightly ahead. Hour 38, perfect alignment with projections. Reporters followed him, cameras clicking. "Mr. Kaiser, are you confident you'll meet the deadline?" "The work speaks for itself," he replied, gesturing at the ship. "Look at that. 40 hours ago, that was an empty shipway. Now it's a nearly complete Liberty ship. These workers, these welders, fitters, riggers, electricians, they're not just building a ship. They're rewriting what's possible." By the end of day 2, the superstructure was largely complete. The ship had a bridge, deck, houses, masts. It was recognizably a ship, not just a hull. Day 3 was systems, engine installation, electrical wiring, plumbing, all the mechanical guts that would make the ship functional. This was detail work, requiring precision and patience. The engine itself, a massive triple-expansion steam engine, 21 feet long and 19 feet tall, had been pre-assembled and tested. It was lowered into the engine room in one piece, in a delicate operation that required 4 cranes working in coordination. Easy, easy. The crane operator murmured into his radio. Down 2 inches, hold. Down 1 inch, perfect. Set. The engine settled onto its mounts with a deep metallic thud. Immediately, workers swarmed at connecting pipes, wiring, control systems. The choreography continued, every person knowing their role, no confusion, no hesitation. By midnight of day 3, 72 hours into the construction, the ship was mechanically complete. Every system installed, every wire connected, every pipe fitted. Only finishing work remained. Richmond, California, November 12th, 1942. Day 4 was a race against the clock. Launch was scheduled for 3:30 p.m. That gave them 15.5 hours to complete final details, run inspections, and prepare the ship for sliding down the ways. The pace intensified. Painters worked on scaffolds, applying the final coat of gray paint to the hull. Electricians tested circuits. Plumbers pressure tested every line. Inspectors moved through the ship with checklists, verifying installations, checking welds, ensuring that the incredible speed hadn't compromised quality. By noon, the work was essentially complete. The Robert E. Peary sat on the ways, a fully formed Liberty ship, ready to launch. Commander Hayes from the Navy Inspection Office conducted his final walk-through with Kaiser beside him. They moved through the ship, Hayes checking systems, examining welds, testing equipment. In the engine room, Hayes spent 20 minutes examining the installation. In the cargo holds, he inspected the welding on the bulkheads and hull plates. On the bridge, he tested the communication and navigation equipment. Finally, standing on the main deck in the early afternoon sun, Hayes turned to Kaiser. "Mr. Kaiser, I've inspected ships for 30 years. I've never seen anything like this." He paused, and Kaiser felt his heart sink until Hayes continued. "It's perfect. Every system properly installed, every weld to specification. This ship's ready for service." Kaiser felt something release in his chest. Tension he'd been carrying for 4 days. "Thank you, Commander." "Don't thank me," Hayes said. "Thank your workers. They just accomplished something I wouldn't have believed possible if I hadn't watched it happen." At 3:30 p.m. on November 12th, 1942, exactly 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after the keel had been laid, the SS Robert E. Peary launched. The crowd was enormous. Thousands of workers, hundreds of reporters, Navy brass, city officials, and civilians who'd heard about the attempt had come to watch history. Kaiser stood at the microphone, looking at the ship that represented something more than just fast construction. "This ship," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd, "was built by people who were told what they were attempting was impossible. They were told you can't build a ship in 4 days. They were told welding is too risky. They were told workers without years of experience couldn't do this work." He gestured at the Robert E. Peary. "They were told wrong. This ship is proof that American workers, given the right tools, the right training, and the right leadership, can accomplish anything. This ship is proof that we can build faster than our enemies can destroy. And this ship is proof that the word impossible is just a challenge waiting to be overcome." The champagne bottle swung, shattered against the bow. The blocks were knocked away. And the Robert E. Peary, 2,500 tons of welded steel, began to slide. The sheer movement was slow at first, then faster, the massive hull accelerating down the ways. It hit the water with a tremendous splash, displacement creating waves that radiated across the bay. For a moment, the ship rode deep, then its natural buoyancy took over, and it rose, floating free. The crowd erupted. Workers who'd gone 4 days with minimal sleep embraced, laughed, some wept. Dorothy found Sarah, and they hugged, both of them laughing and crying at once. "We did it," Dorothy kept saying. "We actually did it." On November 15th, 3 days later, the Robert E. Peary was fully outfitted and ready for service. Total time from keel to delivery, 7 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. The newsreels played in theaters across America and around the world. In London, Churchill watched the footage and wrote to Roosevelt, "Your industrial capacity continues to astonish. The enemy must surely realize they cannot win a war of production against such capability." In Berlin, the propaganda value was exactly what Kaiser had hoped for. The German high command saw the footage and understood that the mathematics of attrition had shifted fundamentally. America could replace ships faster than U-boats could sink them, but the real impact was on the workers themselves. 90,000 people in the Richmond shipyards had watched the impossible become real. They'd seen proof that their work, their effort, their skills mattered in ways that could change the course of history. Richmond, California, November 16th, 1942. Henry Kaiser sat in his office looking at the schedule for the next month. 12 ships under construction. Average completion time, 45 days. The Robert E. Peary had proven what was possible. Now they needed to prove what was sustainable. "The Navy wants to know if we can repeat it," Edgar said, entering with a stack of cables and messages. "There's pressure to make this the new standard." Henry shook his head. "No, the Peary was a demonstration, a proof of concept. You can't sustain that pace. It would destroy the workers and compromise quality. What we can sustain is 42 days. Maybe with continued refinement, 35 days. But 4 days, that was a sprint. You can't run a marathon at sprint speed." "So what do we tell the Navy?" "The truth," Henry said, "that we've proven American workers can do the impossible when necessary. But day to day, we're going to do the remarkable instead. Build 3 ships a week, every week, until this war is won." He smiled slightly. "Sometimes the real genius isn't in the dramatic gesture. It's in the sustainable system." Edgar nodded. "The workers are calling the Peary the stunt ship." "Let them," Henry said, "as long as they remember what it proved, that they're capable of more than anyone, including themselves, thought possible." He stood walking to the window that overlooked the shipyard. 4 ways were occupied, 4 ships under construction at different stages. The assembly line was moving, continuous and unstoppable. "The Peary made headlines," he said quietly. "But the next 100 ships, the ones we'll build at normal speed, those are what win wars. The spectacular moment matters, but it's the grinding day after day production that changes the outcome." Outside, welding sparks fell like rain, the light of creation, in an industrial cathedral. The record had been set, the message had been sent. Now came the real work. Building not one miracle ship, but thousands of reliable ones. The SS Robert E. Peary would go on to serve throughout the war. Pacific Theater, Atlantic convoys, D-Day support. She would survive torpedo attacks, storms, and the general brutality of wartime service. In 1946, she would be placed in reserve. In 1963, she would be scrapped, but her legacy was permanent. She proved that American industrial capacity was not just superior, but overwhelming. She demonstrated that with proper planning, coordination, and worker skill, the impossible became merely difficult. And she showed the world that in the race between production and destruction, America had the tools, the people, and the determination to win. 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. A record that would never be equaled, because by the time the war ended, the need for such dramatic demonstrations had passed. But in November 1942, when the Battle of the Atlantic still hung in the balance, when victory was uncertain and the future unclear, the Robert E. Peary became a symbol, proof that democracy, when threatened, could mobilize resources and people in ways that autocracy never could. 1 ship, 4 days. A message to the world: we can build faster than you can destroy, and we will bury you in steel. North Atlantic, November 24th, 1943. The SS John P. Gaines was 3 days out of New York, bound for Liverpool with a cargo of military supplies, when the cold became something more than discomfort. The water temperature had dropped to 2 degrees. Ice formed on the rigging. Men on watch counted minutes before their fingers stopped responding. Captain Morrison felt the crack before he heard it, a vibration through the deck plates, a wrongness in the ship's movement. Then the sound, a metallic shriek that ran the length of the vessel, sharp and final. He ran to the starboard rail and looked aft. What he saw made no sense. A crack was spreading across the deck, opening like a zipper, running faster than a man could sprint. As he watched, frozen in disbelief, the crack reached the hull and continued downward. The John P. Gaines broke in half. The two sections remained afloat for 17 minutes, long enough for most of the crew to reach lifeboats. But 10 men were trapped in the bow section when it rolled and sank. They died not from enemy action, but from steel that had simply stopped behaving like steel. Cambridge, England, February 1944. Constance Tipper examined the steel sample under her microscope, then looked again, not trusting what she was seeing. The fracture surface was wrong, crystalline, brittle, showing none of the ductile deformation that steel was supposed to exhibit. At 56, Tipper was one of the few women in engineering academia, a metallurgist who'd spent decades studying how materials failed. The British Admiralty had sent her samples from the Empire Duke and 3 American Liberty ships that had cracked catastrophically. They wanted answers. "It's not the welding," she said to her assistant. "Everyone wants to blame the welders. Inexperienced workers, rush training, women doing men's work, but look at this." She indicated the fracture pattern. The crack didn't start in the weld. It started in the base metal and propagated through both welded and unwelded sections equally. She pulled out her notes. "I've been testing samples at different temperatures. Watch this." She placed a steel specimen in a tank of freezing water, let it cool, then struck it with a testing hammer. The steel shattered like glass. She removed another identical specimen, kept at room temperature, and struck it. The steel bent, deformed, absorbed the impact. "Same steel," Tipper said quietly. "Different temperature, completely different behavior." Richmond, California, March 1944. Henry Kaiser read the report 3 times, each time hoping he'd misunderstood. Nearly 1,500 instances of significant cracking in Liberty ships. 3 complete structural failures, 12 ships that had broken in half. And the cause, according to this British scientist named Tipper, was the steel itself becoming brittle in cold water. "The Navy wants to know what we're going to do," Edgar said. "What we're going to do," Henry replied slowly, "is fix it immediately." He stood, beginning to pace. Tippers identified the problem: ductile to brittle transition, below a critical temperature, around 7 degrees Celsius for the steel we've been using. The material changes behavior. Add in stress concentrators like square hatch corners and welded seams that allow cracks to propagate, and you get catastrophic failure. Can it be fixed? Yes. Improve steel quality, reduce sulfur and phosphorus content, round the hatch corners to eliminate stress concentration, install crack arresters, riveted straps that interrupt crack propagation, better welding procedures. Henry looked at his son. "It'll slow production slightly, it'll cost more, but Edgar, men are dying because of choices I made. Fast construction, welded hulls, standardized designs, all the innovations that made this program work are also creating vulnerabilities." "You didn't know—" "That's not an excuse," Henry interrupted. "I chose speed over caution. I chose innovation over proven methods. Those were calculated risks, and I made them consciously. Now we pay the price of making them right." The fixes were implemented rapidly. New steel specifications went to all suppliers. Modification kits were created for ships already in service. Curved reinforcement strips for hatches, riveted crack, arresters for hulls. Welding procedures were revised. Preheat the steel, control cooling rates, stress relieve critical joints. By mid-1944, the cracking problem was largely solved. New ships incorporated the improvements from the keel up. Existing ships were retrofitted during normal maintenance. The crisis passed, leaving behind lessons that would reshape material science for decades. But the cost was real. 19 Liberty ships had broken in half. Hundreds more had suffered significant cracking. Men had died, not from enemy torpedoes, but from metal that had betrayed them at the molecular level. Constance Tipper's discovery of ductile brittle transition temperature became foundational to modern materials engineering. Her Tipper test for measuring this transition is still used today. The Liberty ship failures became case studies in every engineering school, teaching generations about the importance of material selection, stress analysis, and the dangers of pushing innovation too fast. Richmond, California, May 1944. Dorothy Martinez stood on the deck of a Liberty ship being retrofitted with crack arresters, watching welders install the riveted straps that would prevent cracks from propagating. She thought about the John P. Gaines, about the 10 men who died when the ship broke. Could have been us, Sarah said beside her. Could have been any ship we worked on. But it wasn't, Dorothy replied, and now we're fixing it, making it right. Does that absolve us? If we built the flaws in? Dorothy was quiet, considering. No, but it means we take responsibility for improving what we created. We learned, we adapted. That's what matters. Below them, a crack arrestor was riveted into place, a strip of steel that would stop fractures from running unchecked through the hull. It was a small fix for a large problem, but multiplied across 2,700 ships, it would save countless lives. The steel had betrayed them, but human ingenuity, Tipper's science, Kaiser's willingness to change, workers' skill in implementing fixes, had corrected the betrayal. War demands speed, but survival demands learning. The Liberty ships had taught that lesson in blood and cold water and broken steel. Now came the work of ensuring the lesson was never forgotten. Omaha Beach, Normandy, June 6, 1944. The SS Charles Morgan sat 300 yards offshore, her hull riding low with the weight of tanks, ammunition, and medical supplies. Around her, the largest amphibious invasion in history was unfolding in smoke and chaos and blood. Liberty ships formed the backbone of the invasion fleet, unglamorous workhorses ferrying the materials of war across the English Channel. They weren't fast, they weren't elegant, but they were there. Dozens of them, delivering the 156,000 troops and 20,000 vehicles that would crack Hitler's Atlantic Wall. Captain Reynolds watched landing craft shuttle between his ship and the beach, each trip carrying men into the maelstrom. His crew, many of them merchant marine volunteers barely out of their teens, worked without pause, unloading cargo under sporadic artillery fire. "We built this ship in Richmond," his first mate said, reading the builder's plate. 42 days from keel to delivery. Reynolds nodded. 42 days to build, 1 day to help change the course of history. The mathematics worked. Pacific Theater, August 1945. When Japan surrendered, 2,610 Liberty ships were in service. They'd carried 75% of all military cargo, food, fuel, ammunition, vehicles, troops. They'd sustained the island-hopping campaign across the Pacific, maintained supply lines to the Soviet Union, kept Britain fed and armed through the darkest years. Of the 2,610 built, 200 had been lost to U-boats, mines, kamikaze attacks, storms. A 93% survival rate for ships that had been derided as ugly ducklings, built too fast by workers who supposedly lacked the skill for such work. The mathematics of war had been brutal and simple. Could America build ships faster than enemies could sink them? The answer, written in welded steel and the sweat of 90,000 workers, was yes. Richmond, California, September 1945. The shipyard shut down within weeks of Japan's surrender. The assembly lines that had run continuously for 4 years fell silent. Workers collected final paychecks and dispersed, back to farms, to cities, to lives interrupted by war. Dorothy Martinez stood at the gate of Shipyard 3 for the last time, looking at the empty ways. "Strange," she said to Sarah. 4 years of noise, and now nothing. "What will you do?" Sarah asked. "I don't know. Go home, I guess. Try to find work." Dorothy smiled without humor, though I doubt anyone's hiring female welders in peacetime. Many of the women who'd proven their capability were pushed back into traditional roles. The promise of equality evaporated with victory, but something had changed permanently. These women knew what they could do. That knowledge couldn't be erased. East Encounter returned to Louisiana, but not to waiting tables. She'd saved money, learned skills, gained confidence. She opened a small business, hired workers, built something of her own. Richmond had given her more than wages. It had given her belief in her own capability. James Chen returned to San Francisco with a stellar recommendation from Kaiser and a reputation as an innovator. Doors that had been closed before the war opened cautiously. Not fully, not easily, but enough. Progress measured in inches, but progress nonetheless. Richmond, California, October 2000, the Rosie the Riveter, Chase, World War II. Homefront National Historical Park was dedicated on the site of Kaiser's Shipyard 3. Elderly veterans of the shipyards gathered, women in their 80s who'd once wielded welding torches, men who'd fitted hull plates, survivors of an industrial miracle. Dorothy Martinez, now 93, stood before a crowd and spoke haltingly about those years. We didn't think we were making history. We thought we were just working, building ships because ships were needed. She paused, emotion catching her voice. But we were part of something larger. We proved that ordinary people, given purpose and opportunity, can do extraordinary things. San Francisco Bay, 2025. The SS Jeremiah O'Brien, one of only 2 surviving operational Liberty ships, sailed through the Golden Gate on a clear morning. On deck stood descendants of the workers who'd built her, historians who studied the era, and a handful of veterans old enough to remember when Liberty ships filled every harbor. The ship was slow, ungainly, functional rather than beautiful. But she floated. 80 years after her construction, she still performed the task she was designed for. The legacy of the Liberty ships extended far beyond their wartime service. The prefabrication techniques pioneered in Richmond became standard in shipbuilding worldwide. The lessons learned from brittle fracture failures informed materials science for generations. Bridges, aircraft, nuclear reactors all benefited from Constance Tipper's discoveries. The social impact was harder to quantify, but no less real. The Rosies who'd welded ships became mothers and grandmothers who taught their daughters that gender didn't determine capability. The minorities who'd found opportunity in wartime Richmond carried those expectations into the civil rights movements that followed. Henry Kaiser's innovations in healthcare, the prepaid system that became Kaiser Permanente, provided a model for modern health maintenance organizations. The numbers told their own story. 2,710 ships built, 27% of all U.S. wartime shipping, an average of 3 ships completed every 2 days at the program's peak, from the impossibility to routine in less than 2 years. But behind the numbers were people. 90,000 workers who transformed American industrial capacity, engineers who'd reimagined what shipbuilding could be, scientists who'd solved problems no one knew existed, sailors who'd trusted their lives to ships built at unprecedented speed. The Liberty ships weren't the most advanced vessels ever built. They weren't the fastest or the most powerful, but they were enough. In war, enough delivered in quantity is better than perfect delivered too late. Richmond's shipyards were gone now, the land reclaimed for other uses, but the ships remained, most scrapped decades ago, their steel recycled, but 2 still sailing as living monuments, and the lesson remained that when survival demands it, human beings can achieve the impossible by the simple method of refusing to accept that word. That innovation often comes not from experts entrenched in tradition, but from outsiders willing to question assumptions. That diverse teams, women, minorities, elderly, disabled, can accomplish what homogeneous groups never could. The factory that built a ship every 4 days had done more than win a war. It had proven what democracy, when threatened, could mobilize, not just steel and welding rods, but human potential itself, a vast, largely untapped, waiting only for necessity and opportunity to reveal what had always been possible. 2,710 ships, 1 victory, and a lesson for every generation that would follow. The impossible is just the possible waiting to be proven.